Hey, what's up guys? It's Tip. I want you to close your eyes for a second and picture this image. You're sitting at your computer desk with your middle finger positioned carefully over the return key on your keyboard. Every few seconds, you eagerly glance at the clock on your phone. At the stroke of midnight, your finger crashes hard into the return key on your keyboard, and a few moments later, you've logged into Classic Azeroth for the first time in 15 years. That is, if you can make it out of the starting zone. Adored by some, and despised by many, the fresh server starting experience is a memorable one to say the least. It's one of the few times in Warcraft where you could see hundreds of players in such close proximity, making the world feel truly alive. But it's also a time when player vitriol and resentment was at a raging high, as players and groups competed with one another for precious mob tags. With vanilla respawn timers set at 15 minutes, and with 400 people packed into a single starting zone, the competition could become quite fierce, and for many players, tagging quest mobs became virtually impossible. As you can probably imagine, competing against 400 other players for those 10 boars was downright infuriating for most people. It just wasn't fun to camp a spawn point for 15 minutes, only to watch some other random group sweep in at the last second and take the kill. So to combat this frustrating experience, Blizzard eventually introduced the dynamic spawning feature that we see in the game today. But if you weren't aware, the dynamic spawns didn't debut until the Burning Crusade, meaning that for the entirety of vanilla WoW, players were competing neck and neck over the most rudimentary mobs while spending a good portion of their time just waiting. And waiting, and waiting. It's the memory of this dull experience that has brought the question of dynamic spawn times to the classic WoW debate arena. Many believe dynamic spawns to be necessary, at least for the first day or two of Classic's launch. Such proponents have cited the mental well-being of the players as the reasoning behind their position. But those opposed to the idea have stated that the competition and cooperation that comes with mob camping is simply a part of the vanilla experience. With both sides adamant in their convictions, the debate has continued to rage on with no clear end in sight. Before I get to my opinion on the issue, I think it's important to differentiate between the terms, quote, changes and, quote, adjustments. In the context of the classic WoW debate, I personally define a change as any foreign addition to the vanilla WoW gameplay that did not exist during the product's lifespan, or any deviation from the original features and concepts introduced therein. Conversely, I define adjustment as a response to a change, intended to compensate for the damage or benefit the change has incurred. For example, upwardly revising boss values in classic raids to accommodate patch 112.1 talents would be considered an adjustment under this definition and not a change. This distinction is important because while changes are considered abhorrent to purists such as myself, adjustments are not, and in many cases, they're almost necessary. But with that said, let's get back to the argument. As I stated previously, proponents of dynamic spawn times base their position on the assumption that the feature is desired by and beneficial for the vast majority of players. Personally, I'm critical of this point for a number of reasons. First and foremost, no single individual can claim to know the desires of millions scattered across the world. Even if the assumption was based on solid sampling data, what players want and what vanilla WoW offered were not always aligned in parallel. For example, the honor system. When forced to decide between player-based desires and the preservation of classic WoW's authenticity, should we really be choosing the former over the latter? Will this not open the floodgates to various other potential changes to vanilla gameplay and ultimately compromise the integrity of Classic? I think it could. In my changes video, I informally referred to the butterfly effect that even the smallest of changes could have on the larger Classic WoW experience. By establishing a precedent where the desires of the player base supersede the intent to reproduce the vanilla experience, we're kind of condoning any and every quality of life change requested online. Or are we? Let's go back to the linguistic distinction we made earlier. Based on how we define change and adjustment, which category do you think dynamic spawning falls under? On the surface, it would seem that DSTs are a change, as the system is technically a foreign addition to the original vanilla design. But if Classic WoW releases with a limited amount of servers, couldn't it be argued that dynamic respawn times are an adjustment? Remember guys, in 2004, Vanilla WoW launched with close to 90 servers for the US population alone, giving players a diverse menu of server types and sizes to choose from. That meant players could avoid the hectic bacchanal of a high-pop server's starting zones if they pleased. Given the fact that Classic WoW will likely launch with less servers than Vanilla, the existence of dynamic spawn timers, in my opinion, has grounds for justification. At least temporarily. Regardless of how you feel about dynamic respawns, I think we can agree that their implementation should be confined solely to the starting zones in Classic WoW. A wider implementation could have major consequences on server economy and could grant larger servers a one-sided advantage over smaller ones. Additionally, seeing as the brunt of the demand of dynamic spawns will occur within the first days of launch, I think it's reasonable to limit its effect within this high-activity time frame. Anything beyond this finite implementation could transform DSTs from a justifiable adjustment to a foreign change. And you know how I feel about changes, fellas, which is why if you ask me, I don't want to see any dynamic spawns at all. But for those who prefer a less contentious leveling experience, I recommend you wait a couple of days for the first wave of neckbeards to reach the second zone before you hop in. Just my 2 cents. But who cares about me? Fellas, what do you guys think? Do you think dynamic spawning should exist in Classic WoW? Let me know in the comments and we'll discuss this thing together. And I hope you enjoyed this video, fellas. I make a new change video every week covering a different topic, so if you liked what you saw, sub it up and stick around because we got more coming. If you missed the first episode of the Classic Cast hosted by myself, SFan, and Stay Safe TV, I'll leave a link in the description below so you can check it out. And for Classic WoW news and updates, you can follow me on Twitter as well. I hope you enjoy your day, fellas, and as always, tips out, baby.